Welcome back, Chappelle. Welcome back, Honors. Welcome back, everybody, to your post-storming the Bastille flip, right? So, first of all, quick shout out to everybody. Y'all are crushing it right now, right? You're doing so good. You're understanding this content. You're getting the story. You understand why it's so important that we talk about the leaders and the events. And some of y'all struggle with the Estates General and stuff like that. But it is clear that a lot of y'all get the Enlightenment. Academic kids, y'all did really well in your quiz today. I was very, very impressed there. Honors kids, we'll talk about a couple of y'all's assignments coming out of break and stuff like that that are going to make up for some of those quiz grades. But anyway, let's jump right back into where we left off in class when we were talking about the Parisians storming the Bastille, right? So, now we talked about what the Bastille is in class, talked about how it was a medieval fortress where they were holding gunpowder in it, right? But it's just important to know that the failing Estates General, the formation of the National Assembly, the tennis court oath, all this stuff was demonstrating to the bourgeoisie that there was no way to peacefully bring about reform to France. That it was going to be violent, it was going to be intense, and everybody was confirmed in those feelings when the military starts moving around Paris, right? So, 12 miles down the road in Paris, the military is starting to move around. And they're starting to get to the point where they're having some little armed conflicts in the streets with some of these different protesters and stuff like that. And the urban workers of Paris, who had been left hungry and angry during the Estates General, when they heard that it wasn't going well, they were reading newspapers that were saying that it wasn't going very well, and they were finding out that all of these reforms were failing, that none of the voting was changing, that all these things are going on. And now that they see men with guns in their city, they decide they need guns too. So they go in and they storm the Hotel des Invalides, right? And the Hotel des Invalides, remember, is not the building that we're talking about yet. That's the one where it was like a retirement home for retired officers from war and stuff like that. And Napoleon Bonaparte's buried right there. It's actually on my bucket list. I gotta go see it, right? So now the Hotel des Invalides gets stormed. They find a ridiculous amount of guns inside there, over 500 guns, and they end up bringing them out to the streets. But there's a problem. They don't have any gunpowder, and they don't have any bullets, so they head right here. They find out that the military has separated the guns and the gunpowder, and they hid the gunpowder inside of this bad boy, the Bastille, right? Now, the Bastille, remember, by this point, was a prison, right? Held on to about some very pretty much top priority political prisoners and some also low-level offenders and stuff like that. They storm into the Bastille after a guy gets crushed by a drawbridge, after somebody gets shot, after the warden's head gets cut off and all this stuff. But the mob in Paris storms into the Bastille on July 14th, 1789. And at this moment, we believe that the French Revolution has truly begun, right? This is freeing the prisoners, taking the gunpowder inside, and now the Marquis de Lafayette is armed control over the new National Guard, right? So what do we have on our hands here? We have a revolutionary force of urban workers with guns that are being led by the Marquis de Lafayette, who are now violently willing to get the reforms that they want, right? Now, really quick, looking at the difference between the American Revolution and the French Revolution. The American Revolution is going to be the Americans versus the British military. This one, on the other hand, is pro-revolutionary citizens against non-revolutionary citizens, right? So you're seeing in the streets of Paris, the storming of the Bastille is a very good characterizing event of the French Revolution, because we're going to break, burn, destroy until the reforms are met, right? Maybe they didn't have this idea in their head when they were at the tennis court oath and they were dancing around and feeling themselves, but the big thing about it is that it's going to get very, very intense from here on out, right? So now the revolution has started. Now we have heads on sticks, right? These are the heads of the warden and his assistants with their heads on pikes being paraded through the streets of France. And then also, here are some pictures of the Bastille. This is another picture of the storming of the Bastille, which is no longer there because it was completely destroyed. And then every single year on July 14th in France, they celebrate Bastille Day with fireworks, much like our Independence Day, right? So now going into it, though, check this out. The revolution has begun. We got two very, very important symbols to discuss on this slide right here. We've got this bad boy right here, which is very, very important. It's known as a tricolor cockade, right? So now, the tricolor cockade is a pin that people would wear if they were pro-revolution, right? So you're seeing these ideas pop up. You're seeing people identify with the revolution. And you're seeing them begin to wear items that are showing that they are revolutionary citizens of France. This is mainly to delineate them and distinguish them between some of the old nobility that doesn't want this revolution and everybody else, right? The tricolor represents two things. Blue and red are the old colors of Paris, and white is supposed to be the king. Now, the original colors of these pins were actually just blue and red. The people of Paris want their reforms. But then the Marquis de Lafayette told them to add this white in there because he actually wanted to keep the king in office. The next one that you would always see is this hat, right? So like the red cap of the revolution, right? Whenever you saw someone wearing this thing, it meant that they were pro-revolution and that they wanted to see dramatic reforms and changes in France. Where the hat comes from is former Roman slaves used to wear a hat much like this. It's called a philo cap. And like this thing right here, they made it red because in Rome, if you were a freed slave, you wore one of those around Rome to distinguish yourself. It's not a slave, but a freed slave, right? And so this becomes a symbol of the revolution and actually becomes a symbol of liberty in general, right? Because it's showing your freedom. Now, it's everywhere too. Even if you look at the House Senate seal, right? In the United States, you can actually see a red cap of liberty and a red cap of the revolution sitting right on top of this shield right here. And what's that down there below it? What are these two things? Oh, they're two fascists. Yeah. Try and tell me that Roman stuff is not still all the way around, and try and tell me that this stuff doesn't make sense. But there is a red cap right there of the revolution that is going to be basically becoming a symbol of liberty and equality. And speaking of liberty and equality, these are the three guiding words of the French Revolution, okay? Liberty, equality, fraternity, right? Liberté, égalité. So like the biggest thing about it is they're French words for liberty. Égalité is like equality, and fraternité is like brotherhood. So the idea behind these three words was that was what they wanted. They wanted liberty, they wanted equality, and they wanted brotherhood amongst French citizens, right? So, but the thing about it is it's going to get real intense real fast. All right, so now one of the first things that comes out after the storming of the Bastille is first and foremost, like we said, we know that the Marquis de Lafayette is in charge of the National Guard. And actually looking at him right here, you can see on his hat, he's wearing, there's a tricolor, So as you can see with that symbol, he's very pro-revolution. And speaking of being so pro-revolution, the Marquis de Lafayette is actually going to have a new document written for the people of France. And this is so genius, and he takes inspiration from Thomas Jefferson's Declaration of Independence. And actually, fun fact, some of you who like American history a lot will like this, Thomas Jefferson helped him write this document. And the document is known as the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizenry. Now, like, look, so I always add this little thing in there. The name of the entire document is the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizenry, but I think this makes the document sound lame. Whenever you say the Declaration of the Rights of Man, it like sounds really intense, but then when you're like, in Citizenry, it's just not as good. But Thomas Jefferson literally helped the Marquis de Lafayette actually write this entire thing. And it outlines all of the articles and all of the rights that people have in the new state of France under the new Revolutionary Party. So this is a full-on revolution because we're creating new rights for people. We're really getting after it right now, and everybody is having like a lot of new rights given to them, right? So first things first, make those rights solid. And so they write them and actually declare them in this document. Now, a lot of people sometimes refer to this as the DORM, right? D-O-R-M, the Declaration of the Rights of Man, which is the document that sets out the new rights of all men under the revolution, okay? Now, the thing about it is there's a lot of important rights in this entire thing because you have to understand why this document is so important. They basically created their own version of a Bill of Rights, right? So modeled off our Bill of Rights and our Declaration of Independence, it has a lot of very simple freedoms inside of it. And whenever it pops up on the test in an excerpt, you're going to be able to need to identify it, right? It creates a country controlled by the general will of good, which is a little bit scary because that general will concept is a Jean-Jacques Rousseau concept. And as we know, things can get a little dicey when you go with general will. But it has a lot of other normal rights inside of it. It said, the first article says, men are born and remain free in equal rights. The second one says that all political association is to preserve the natural rights of man, which is liberty, property, and security. Also the other one says, law cannot prohibit actions such as that are hurtful to society. There's also free speech in here. There's also stuff about the Declaration of Religious Tolerance in there. It's ridiculous, okay? So that's the examples that I'm giving you. It's a very important document. Now, however, this document never got rid of the king. Now, it's important to know that because this document, with all of its new rights, is going to try and make Louis not the king of France, but the king of the French people, right? Trying to basically say they want to create a what type of monarchy? They want to create a constitutional monarchy. Problem is, though, you need Louis to sign this bad boy, right? You have to get Marquis de Lafayette to bring this document to him, and he must sign it, and that means he agrees to these new rights, right? Well, the Declaration of the Rights of Man is being written. The storming of the Bastille has happened. Things are really chaotic and crazy. And so all this intensity begins to spill out into the countryside, right? Now, the countryside is where most of the rural peasants live. And the bulk of French citizens don't live in cities. They live out in the country. Now, speaking of that, though, you have to understand also that this intensity and all these events are going to start making their way out there. People are going to start hearing about it. And they're going to be like, wait, what do you mean? The people stormed the Bastille in Paris? That's crazy. We should burn stuff too. And so the countryside is going to stop looking like this and start looking like this, right? And this event is known as the Great Fear, right? So the Great Fear happens almost right off the heels of the storming of the Bastille. And all the countryside gets involved. Now France is at full-blown revolution all over the place. It's throughout their entire country, in the countryside, in the other cities. Their revolutions are breaking out, right? The Great Fear was when these riots broke out in the countryside and these rural peasants and serfs began to burn the houses of nobles, steal their items, and destroy feudal contracts, right? As you can see right here, these are the homes of several nobles. Right here are some serfs breaking in the door down with a battering ram. They're stealing a carriage. They're burning everything down. They're going insane because they're sick and tired of this feudal system, and they believe in the ideas that were outlined in that document by the Marquis de Lafayette, right? They believe in the intensity that is being outlined by the storming of the Bastille. They want it. They need it. They're eating it up, right? So, the big thing about it is the Great Fear sweeps through the countryside, and what type of effect is this going to have? And also, what is this a sign of, right? So, this is a sign of popular participation, right? It's a sign of popular participation, and also it's a sign of the poor are willing to be violent to get their demands met. Just keep that in the back of your mind. The poor and the disenfranchised are furious. They're furious that it's been this way for so long. They're furious they've had to pay these taxes this whole time. They're furious the Estates General failed. They're furious that Louis didn't give the states more votes. They're furious about everything. They're furious about the tennis court oath actually having to happen at the Estates General instead of just listening to the new National Assembly. And so they're so mad, they're willing to burn stuff to the ground. And also, it's a sign of the fact that it's leaching out into the rest of France. This is not going to be a revolution that is isolated to one city. It is going to be a revolution of an entire government, of an entire people, and of an entire structure, right? So the thing about it is, the Great Fear breaks out. We got noble homes on fire. We got feudal contracts being burned. We got all this stuff being stolen. So the National Assembly sees this as a moment to be like, okay, this is what we're going to do. We got to get these people to calm down a little bit. Why? Why do you need them to calm down a little bit? Because if everybody just starts burning stuff down, what are we going to get done? Right? You got to actually get them to be positive in the sense of progression and doing good things and making change, right? So this is still in 1789, but one of the biggest events happens during the revolution right off the heels of this. And it's known as the Night of August the 4th, 1789. Do me a favor, highlight Great Fear, highlight Night of August the 4th. They're two very important events. The Night of August the 4th is a direct reaction to the Great Fear and trying to actually bring some peace and stability. This is what's known, if you're in my AP class, we talk about the liberal phase of the revolution, right? So the French Revolution has 4 phases. Liberal, radical, directory, Napoleonic, right? So the liberal phase will always have a violent act and then something very calm to ease it down or smooth it out, right? So the Night of August the 4th, 1789, is to try and slow this violence down. The National Assembly forces nobles to come in to the National Meeting Hall in Paris, and they make them, at the tip of a sword, they tell them, sign over everything you own and give it back to the people of France, or we're going to kill you. They march the nobles down. They march priests down there, and they have to give up their rights, their titles, their property. So what has just happened? At this meeting, in this hall, with these people, feudalism has been abolished, right? So France becomes the first country in all of Europe to abolish the feudal system that has plagued their societies since the Middle Ages. That is insane. So nobles no longer exist. You're not a noble anymore. You're just Jim. You're just a guy that's now a part of this country, and you can decide to be with us or you can be against us. Now, with this massive moment, though, you now have no more feudalism. You now have noble homes burning in the countryside. You've got no more Bastille. You've got an armed National Guard being led by the Marquis de Lafayette. You have all these crazy things happening. But there's still one issue with everything right now. Louis still hasn't signed that document. So you have to understand that Louis has yet to sign a very important document, okay? Now, that important document is so important, in fact, that if he doesn't sign it, it means that no constitutional monarchy would be created. If he doesn't sign it, it means that none of those rights outlined in that Declaration of the Rights of Man are going to mean anything. And if he doesn't sign it, we're all going to have some massive issues, right? So what ends up happening is a very crazy and very important event. Wow, we've learned this much so far in this unit. This is ridiculous. Now, anyway, so here we go. And it's known as the Women's March on Versailles. That's right, ladies! The women are going to force the king to do something, all right? So here's what happened, all right? So in the Women's March on Versailles, a very, very important event in the French Revolution, you got to understand that people were starting to get restless, right? So people were starting to get restless. They knew that basically the document had been written, Declaration of Rights of Man is ready to go, there's a new National Guard, feudalism doesn't exist anymore, but people are still hungry, right? So bread is not flowing through the streets to feed the people of France, right? People are still frustrated. And everybody starts hearing about how Louis hasn't signed that document yet. And on top of everything, they start reading a newspaper that's running around. So just check this out, okay? There's this guy that lives in France, okay? And his name is Jean-Paul Marat, all right? So Jean-Paul Marat is this weird, eccentric little dude who actually has a newspaper that he writes, right? So Jean-Paul Marat writes a newspaper called L'Ami des Peuples, which means the friend of the people. He writes in this newspaper inflammatory and mean things about the royals. He makes fun of Marie Antoinette. He makes fun of Louis XVI. And he was doing this even before the revolution ever started, right? So the thing about it is, he was forced to go into hiding. And so this dude literally lived in the sewers of France for over a year, right? Giving him a skin disease because he was hiding from the royal officers, giving him a skin disease that he had to sit in a medical bath for 6 hours a day to make sure that his alligator skin didn't just flake off, right? So the thing about it is, Jean-Paul Marat then wrote an article in his newspaper after the Bastille was burned to the ground. He emerges out of the sewers. He's like, yeah, no more hiding for me. No more sewers for me. And he comes up out of the sewers and he writes an article. And he says, people of France, I've heard some shenanigans have been going on at the Palace of Versailles. I heard that while we're here burning stuff down, abolishing feudalism, trying to feed our children, that Louis is at his house. He's throwing parties. He's getting all this food to the nobles. He's having more food. He's throwing food away. He's wasting things. And I heard at this party that Louis took one of the tricolor Cockade pins, threw it onto the ground, and stomped on it. People begin to read the article that this guy wrote, who's going to become a very important player later on in the French Revolution, and they are now furious, right? So they're absolutely livid. And so who ends up showing up to talk to the Marquis de Lafayette that is way more mad than anybody else is actually surprisingly not who you would expect. You would have thought it would have been a band of angry men that roll up and they get so frustrated that they're ready to go to Versailles, right? False. A giant group of women approach the Marquis de Lafayette. They come up to him with this newspaper and they're like, is this true? Is Louis have all this food? Does he have all this stuff? Is he stomping on our symbol of the revolution? And the Marquis de Lafayette tries to calm them down. He's like, ladies, please, put your ridiculously muscular arms away. So fun fact, these women that were actually showing up had a very important job. They were called fishwives or fishmongering women or poissons, right? They were women that had moved crates of fish all day long as a job. So not only are they mad, not only are they angry that actually their kids haven't eaten, but they're also jacked, right? And they're showing up and they all have knives and weapons and they're like, we're going to go out to Versailles and we're going to gut that fish known as Louis the 16th, right? So they plan on walking all the way to Versailles and demanding that Louis give up all of the bread inside of Versailles so they can feed their children with it. I don't know about y'all, but my mom would be front and center. Sandy Terry is pretty much like right there. That's Sandy dragging this like cannon with him. It's like, oh, hey, we're going to go now. So now a huge band of angry mothers and women marched 6 hours to feed their children, right? In the rain. It rained on them. And then on top of everything else, there was like one giant group of them walking on this way. And they're like, I can't wait to get to Versailles. We're going to destroy him. We're going to make him Susie? And then like they look over and another group of women from a different city were also on their way. And they were like, Carol? And they were like, oh my God. And they like high-fived each other and they were like, oh yeah, you want to keep going? And then so the group just grew even larger. And they're heading out there and the Marquis de Lafayette is with them, right? And there are a lot of other famous French figures that are there with them. Maximilien Robespierre is there. Jean-Paul Marat is there, right? He's like, look at what my article did. So like all these women are going out there and they're angry and furious. And they roll up to that big golden gate of Versailles and they begin to bang on it and they say, bring out the baker, the baker's boy, the baker's wife, everybody, get them out here, right? So like Louis decides to talk to 3 of the leading women, right? To 3 of the women that are leading the march. Turns out that when he talks to them, he's actually charming for once, right? So, and he gives them all of the bread. Apparently, he was so charming that one of the 3 like leading women like fainted. They were like, "Oh my God!" Like so now the thing that happens though is they send him out, but the women are not okay with it. The women are like, "Okay, we appreciate the food. Thank you for the bread. Thanks." Like so, but the next part of that happens is, but you need to get your tail out of that palace into a carriage. And you need to bring your tush straight on down to Paris, right? So they're beginning to make these demands, and the women get so furious that Louis is hiding inside of Versailles that they rip the gate down, run into the palace, kill 4 guards, and cut their heads off and put them on sticks and start running around the palace trying to find Louis. But they want to kill one more person. They are madly irate with Marie Antoinette, right? They want to kill Marie Antoinette. You know why? Because she's got kids too, right? So like they're like, we want the queen, we want her head on a stick, we want her dead because she's got kids and she didn't think about us in this entire progression things. She's so selfish and tone deaf that she didn't think about the children of France while she's fattening up her own children, right? They chase after her. Marie Antoinette runs into Louis's bedroom. They try to hide, and Louis, being a pansy, says to Marie, why don't you go out and talk to them? She walks out. Marie Antoinette walks out onto the balcony with her children with her and says, look, ladies, I'm a mom too. It's okay. And all the women down at the very, very bottom start loading their guns. Like, oh, I'm going to shoot her. What's up? So they start doing it. The Marquis de Lafayette's like, oh, crap. We got to keep them alive because they got to sign the document and all this other stuff. So he goes, wait. And he walks up the stairs. And he goes, ladies, please put down your guns. And Marquis de Lafayette goes up to Marie Antoinette, and right here, he kisses her on the hand. He kisses Marie Antoinette's hand, and he looks out to the crowd of women. And he goes, long live the queen. And the whole crowd's like, oh, okay, Marquis, that's fine. Because he actually apparently was like really handsome and stuff like that. And the women are like literally start cheering, but then they grab the queen, grab the king, throw them into a carriage, and they walk them straight back down to like Paris. This is so significant because the people are now dictating the progression of the revolution. They are bringing him back to Paris. Write that down. Bringing him back to Paris. He is returned to Paris, and he is going to be forced to sign the Declaration of the Rights of Man. Now, some of y'all are probably like, wow, the revolution's over, right? And we'll talk more about that when I see y'all in class soon. Y'all have a good one.